All right, here we go. Hello. My name is MysterE. Welcome to today's live stream. Hope you can hear me okay. Just checking the mic's working all right. There it is. Levels look good. All right, so today we are going to be looking at basically, I guess, yeah, the rise of China. And like I'm going to kind of have a debate with ChatGPT today about kind of like all the hype that's surrounding the rise of China and stuff like that, and whether this is going to start WW3 and all that sort of kind of political rhetoric that you hear being thrown around, all the fear mongering that is being thrown around by our friends in the mainstream media. But yeah, basically, we're gonna have a look at that. But like, we're gonna do it like twofold. I want to have a look, kind of, firstly, at a really interesting video that I saw, which kind of explains some of the context of like how the West perceives China versus how like Asians kind of perceive, or Eastern cultures kind of perceive China, and like that disparity, that contradiction between how these philosophical worldviews kind of compete with one another and give us a distorted perspective on what's happening with geopolitics, which is really interesting because like a lot of the time when you hear people talking about China, especially in the West, which I'm sure most of you are Westerners, you know, when you hear China like debate and stuff like that and discussion, especially with what's happening with like in terms of its relation with the US, and like the West is falling and the American empire is coming to an end and all that sort of general rhetoric, etc., etc. It's always from a Western perspective. And so like I think there's a distorting effect that comes with that. Like you're only seeing it through a Western understanding of things. You're only seeing it through, yeah, like I said, a Western lens. And that is a very particular bias that I don't think people pick up on. Like they just see it as objective, and it's objective within this Western world sphere, but it's not objective when you think of it from an East Asian perspective. So like I want to look at this video. Part of the reason why I wanted to do this, like I've just generally kind of gone down the rabbit hole with China, and especially all the the banter about the rise of China versus the fall of America, etc., etc. But like recently I put out a video that has been labeled rage bait quite recently by an angry commenter. Maybe they're not angry, maybe they're just trying to call it out and make sense of what I'm talking about. But like I put out a video, I'll show you the video so you know what I'm talking about. I put out a video recently, and it's titled "The USSR and China Were Not Socialist. Get over it." And like I mean that. Like I honestly mean that. Like get over it. Like I don't think there's any value. Like, and I said that to someone in the comments. I said, like, what's the value in people wanting to claim that like the Soviet Union, especially the USSR, specifically, especially under like Stalin and all that sort of stuff, like, you know, why is everyone holding on, and what's the advantage to like making the claim or supporting the claim that it was socialism, or it achieved socialism, and it lived up to all the socialist principles? Like what's the advantage of that? Like I just don't know what it is. And like so people defend it, very very enthusiastically, very emotionally, like, oh no, it was socialism, you're a sellout, and you're like, you don't know what you're talking about, and like all this sort of stuff, which is like, it's kind of expected. But like something like this, a piece of content like this, is also like it catches both sides of the argument, because then there's that real right wing kind of sentiment that exists, like this one here. um where is it? Where are you, buddy? From like someone who's got like a, why can't I double click when I want to? Seriously. I always do it by mistake. Yeah. This one here, you can see it says, Laos, not socialist. Cambodia, not socialist. Venezuela, not socialist. Basically, everywhere socialism fails, not socialist, lol. Like, I didn't even talk about those countries, but like that's the usual right wing rhetoric on this. Like when you, as a leftist, try to say that something wasn't, oh, I didn't achieve socialism or isn't socialism or something, they're just like straight away, just like, how dare you? Like, because like it didn't end up working out. Now you don't want to say it's socialist. This is just your like way of weaseling out of the fact that like socialism and communism doesn't work. Checkmate, end of story, go die in a hole somewhere. And so like, yeah, it's the usual right wing talking point. And so I expected this type of stuff, and like, so this type of content is really interesting because it sits in the middle of that debate, because there's a debate on both sides. There's a debate on the left, which is just like whether or not China or Russia, like Maoist China and like Stalinist Russia or the USSR generally, whether it was actually socialist or not. So there's a debate in the leftist circles, and there's a debate on the right, which is like the right wing people attacking them, like attacking left wing people. And like when it suits the right wing, it was socialist because it proves that it fails. But when like it does do great achievements and stuff like that, they don't want to mention the fact that it's socialist. They will call it like, state capitalist or something like that. Or they will attribute whatever like, glories it has or any successes it has, the fact that it's living, in a it's subjected to capitalist tendencies and things like that. So like this is a really interesting piece of content generally, because yeah, it straddles that fine line between aggression from people on the left and aggression from people on the right. And like, yeah, some of the stuff, like, there's some good points in there, like there's this one guy like talking about like all the philosophy of like what it means to be social and stuff like that, and trying to make the case, I guess, that it was socialism because it means like socialism was actually something that started in ancient Greece, and it follows a certain trajectory that is like ownership of everything by the state, and like the state taking control to distribute wealth amongst the masses, and the population, and that equals socialism. But like, obviously my point in the video was nothing to do with that. And like my point in the video is actually something that came along in a live stream that we all did together. I think like last week or something like that, where Gumma Cheese Wing, or Wings of Cheese, I can't keep up with his names these days, but let's go with Gumma Cheese Wing, was like, we were going like back and forth a little bit, talking about, how the socialist and communist movements of the 20th century shouldn't be viewed as socialism and communism, but more as a recipe, and a desire to industrialize, your nation. And like, in order to do that, you had to break free of the throes of the capitalist system that had turned imperialistic. And in order to do that, you had to revolutionize, you had to set a revolutionary movement in motion, like energize and enthuse your people with some type of rhetoric to get them to come on board to help you industrialize. And so you could compete on the world stage. And they used socialist and communist rhetoric to mobilize the masses. And so, yeah, they had a lot of socialist ideals, and they experimented with this type of stuff and that type of, socialist practice, or this type of notion that comes from socialism or communism. But like, it never achieved any of those things. But its primary goal was to, like I said, industrialize, their nations, so they could, like I said, compete on the world stage. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. So for any leftist who's out there who's just like staunchly, you know, wants to die on their sword and say, no, it was socialist and communist through and through, well, like, I don't know what gain you're getting from that, what like advantage you get from that. And then for any right-wing person that, like, says, no, this is exactly what socialism, communism is. This shows you what socialism and communism is capable of. Well, yeah, it's capable of industrializing nations in the 20th century. These people needed a formula to do that. They had missed the window in the late 18th and then throughout the 19th century. They had missed the window, and so capitalism wasn't going to allow them to industrialize, and so they had to do it somehow, and they did it on socialist principles and like with a socialist outlook. And so they industrialized that way. They didn't usher in socialism. They definitely didn't usher in any type of communistic style of living. And it was all centered around the state and the the broad-reaching bureaucracy, very broad-reaching bureaucracy that was supposed to basically challenge the idea of the market and make everything centrally planned. And so, like, from that, interesting piece of content that we all discussed in a live stream, from that interesting piece of content to now, I want to go over and I want to have a chat with ChatGPT. Basically, I don't want to talk to ChatGPT about like challenging the Western narrative on China. Because I think that will be incredibly important for us as revolutionaries moving throughout the 21st century. Like, China is a very special case. For the first time in modern history, and like, well, let's say, post World War to modern history. So I don't know if we call that the postmodern age, but like, let's just say, yeah, post World War II history, the American economy has actually got a competitor. Like we've talked about before, the USSR was never like, there was a Cold War, okay, between, communism and like capitalism. Wings of cheese. How you going, sir? I'm just actually going over a piece of content that I released recently. Thanks for saying hi. Yeah, I'm going over a piece of content that I released recently by the name of USSR and China Were Not Socialist, Get Over It. And it was something that like was spurred on by a conversation that me and you had in like a live stream like last week or the week before maybe. And like we were going back and forth about like this idea that like socialism and communism and their principles applied in the 20th century was a way for countries to, oh, you saw it. Okay. Well, it was a cut from the live stream. And it was just like a vehicle for these societies to industrialize and like, break away from capitalism for long enough to be able to industrialize and like get their societies moving and competing on the world stage. And like it met with some crazy opposition, and I've just been going through for like the last, I don't know, 15 minutes just talking about like the reaction to it, how there's like a hardcore left reaction, which like is completely predictable, which is like, how dare you say they're not socialist or communist, what's wrong with you? And then like there's the typical like right-wing response is just like, oh yeah, well, you just don't want to call it socialist because it sucked, like kind of thing. It's just like, see, you guys always do this, you lefties. You just say as soon as you don't like something, you just say it's not this or it's not that, like kind of thing. Yeah. So like the range is huge. It is huge, and like it sits like this piece of content sits. Oh, the rage. Yeah, the rage is huge. Yeah, like, well, like one of the recent comments was something like that. It's just like, this is just rage bait, man. And like it's funny because it's a good comment because it does straddle the rage on both sides of the argument. The people that are supposed to be supportive of this type of content and the people that just generally hate this type of content with a passion. But like it brings them all out. And so like it's been going nuts, like by my standards, like it's got 1,500 views in like a few days, and like it's got a number of comments, but it's like all people that are just like, no, you don't know what you're talking about, man, like that sort of stuff. So like I've been going on and like dissecting some of the funnier sides of that, or some of the funny arguments that come out of that type of discussion. But like really why I wanted to I'm using that is like I think I want to try and get like have a discussion about like challenging Western perspectives on China. Well, people need to try and critically analyze the 20th century. I think so. I think it's necessary. And I think it's very like, it's very Marxist. Like to try and analyze or Marxian. I'm going to stop using the word Marxist because like, apparently they famously said that Marx, said, I am not a Marxist. And like, I agree with that. I'm not a big fan of Marxists. It's like, being not a fan of Christians. Because like Christians are people that interpret the Bible for themselves as opposed to actually reading the Bible, and trying to actually apply those lessons. They just like dogmatically look at it, and takes, certain segments or whatever you call passages out of the Bible and use it to justify their existence. Marxists are the same. They just take excerpts out of Marx's work to justify their positions on things, as opposed to being Marxian, which is like actually what Marx would have been talking about by looking at his work for what it is. And so like I think it's very Marxian to want to sit back now from the safety of the 21st century. Yeah, it's not a religious code. Yes, and he was not a god, and neither was Lenin. And so like we can look back, from the comfort and the safety of the 21st century now, and really analyze what happened in the 20th century, especially with these communistic, socialist labeled rises, or societies that developed in response to the pressures of capitalism. I think it's a really good thing to do, and we shouldn't get lost in the dogma, which is exactly what has happened in like 90% of the comments section, which is always fun. And I love getting in there and debating people about this stuff. It's hilarious. Like, some people like really want to have a robust discussion. I'm more than happy to engage with those people. And some people want to be a smartass. And so like, I turn on the sarcasm and I turn it on to the best of my ability. I really do. I really try my hardest to fight fire with fire in that regard. So here's to those people. But yeah, like, so what I want to flesh out with this one is I want to have a look at this video that I found by this guy called Martin Jacques. It's such a good French name. But like, he's this kind of Western who kind of looks at China and East Asia from a very different perspective. And I'd like to talk about, like, look at his perspective and use that as a basis for then having a debate with ChatGPT. If you don't think they were socialists or communists, what would you label those movements? I would label them, and like I heard Michael Parenti say something that I agree with quite nicely. Like, I'm pretty sure he calls them socialists and stuff like that. But like, he just said, look, if their main organizational method was like in opposition to the free market system and opposition to capitalism generally, then like just by being anti-capitalists, or like their methodology being anti-capitalist, then like, that makes them socialist kind of thing. I would like not go as far as he did, and I just take it the halfway measure as to what he was saying, that they were anti-capitalist. And they were. Like, their intention was, like, very deliberately to centrally plan and take ownership of the means of production into the hands of the state. And so like, that doesn't happen in capitalism. Like, you have everything designed around the free market ethos. And so you let the market do the planning. And we all know that just means absolute anarchy. Like, it doesn't plan anything. They individually plan the hell out of things, and they like set up cartels, monopolies, duopolies, and they squeeze markets and all that sort of stuff. So they plan that type of stuff, but they don't actually long-term plan. It's just complete anarchy from like a long-term planning perspective. And like, they make sure that the means of production is kind of left up to the idea of private property relations. And so like, these communist and socialist experiments didn't do that. They like definitely made sure that majoritively it was the state that owned the means of production and controlled the workers. So like, they are anti-capitalist in that regard because they don't allow for private property relations unless it's through the state, and they don't allow this kind of anarchy of the market. They plan for things. And so that is definitely anti-capitalist. And like, again, just to reiterate, and like, just to ram home my message or my position on this, it's not socialism then, because that if the state owns the means of production and then owns basically the working class by extension, or puts the working class to use, uses the labor power of the working class for the state's own ends, the state's plans and all that sort of stuff, then the state has assumed that power, or that position of power in the social relation that is between labor and capital. Labor and capital, not between laborer and capitalist, but between labor and capital. The state steps in and controls capital and then uses that capital to put into motion labor power. And so the state unfortunately acts as the capitalist class does. And so like it's anti-capitalist because it removes the capitalist class, but it basically just assumes their function, let's be honest. So like, that's why it's not socialist. It's definitely not socialism. It's definitely not communism. Unless the workers have control over the productive property. Yeah, they need to have workers, like actual workers control. And like you could do that with a state organization, but you'd have to have representatives of the working class, not like representation of the workers, like kind of thing, like, which is what the Soviets were. The Soviets were councils, like local government areas that had like politicians or people that represented the working class in them, but there was still a political organ. Like in a socialist society, you would have the workers themselves involved in the actual organization of their industries. They would own the means of production, the actual people doing the work. That is a huge distinction. Oh, ha ha ha. You'd make people smash their phones. That blasphemy. Unless the workers have a... Yeah, definitely. Smash your phones. Smash the state too while you're at it. Yeah, so anyway, that was just to reiterate my position on that, please. I don't want to go over and beat a dead horse or any of those other turns of phrases. Well, let's have a look at Martin Jacques, and see what he has to say. It might be enlightening for you. It was definitely interesting for me, but like I think, yeah, like I said before, we really need to, as in a Marxian sense, grapple with China. They get angry with you compared to the... They get angry. Oh my God, wouldn't they? Oh yeah, comparing the USSR to capitalists. Yeah, I know. Like that's the type of stuff that is really going to get under people's skin, especially your old hardcore lefties and your Marxist Leninists and your tankies generally. But like, if the shoe fits, boom. Just gonna leave that there. Just gonna leave that out there. Not sure if we have anyone else in the chat or like watching at the moment, but if you are, make yourself known. Say hi. Don't be shy. So yeah, look, it explains like democracy may not work for China. That's not the real point that I want to really get across with this one. There's more substance to it, like in terms of, like I said, this clash between Western philosophy, Eastern philosophy, and a Western perspective on China. And this guy smashes that wall down really, really well, I think. Old Martin Jacques.
Fascinating debate from 2012, over a decade ago, where Martin Jacques dives into the rise of China.
That's why it's really interesting,
and
because
explains
like, this
why
guy
the West shouldn't push China.
This guy was saying this stuff, this Martin guy, was saying this stuff in 2012. So like, what's that? 12 years ago. Is that right? Yeah. So like, a lot's happened since then. And this guy is kind of like prescient in a sense of like Western Eastern relations. But like, it's good to see, because like, if someone's making these types of, having these types of insights back then 10 years ago, and if they still hold like some value, then like I think he's a good commentator to pay attention
to adopt liberal democracy. Let's jump in.
What this motion is about is a country which is a developing country, which in the middle of the 20th century was extremely poor, which had suffered 200 years, during a 200-year period of more or less, and I mean this literally, economic stagnation. Its GDP at the end of this period was more or less the same as it was in the first part of the 19th century. And it had been invaded and partially colonized by many countries including our own. In 1949, China was a mess and a basket case. And the task that confronted China...
Yeah, I know. Yeah, 4IS has been monitoring that one as well. He's just like, oh my God, you hit 1.8. And I was like, yeah. So, like, I don't know if these are rage subs, though, Wings of Cheese. Like, I do get a few of those. Like, people just like, this asshole doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm going to jump in on another video and comment and say that he's just a dumbass, like, kind of thing. But, like, hopefully they're... I find, actually, like, with this type of rage stuff, like, it's the rages that get in the comments, but the people that silently agree with you, they'll just sub and then just move along with their days and stuff like that. But they might be interested in you putting something else out. So, you know, we'll see. We'll see. Don't, you know, I don't know, like, because I find with YouTube these days, like, the subs mean nothing. Like, it's really nice because it gives you certain metrics and milestones and stuff like that. But, like, because of the way the algorithm works, like, I get feedback from subscribers all the time. It's just like, YouTube stopped giving me notifications about your stuff. And I'm just like, what? And that's why, like, I tried to, like, I started up Patreon, obviously, to get some financial support, but, like, to be able to have a better communication channel with people. Like, I can directly get, like, notify people of stuff. And then, like, even the Discord goes ham. Like, you know, I can, like, reach people and they get notifications, not like on YouTube. So the subs don't help there. If you are watching and you haven't introduced yourself, say hi. I might just put the Discord actually invitation in the chat so people can join the Discord server that we have, Mount Movement, which was set up by our friend Jerry Poppins. So yeah, I'll just put the link or the invite in there. Invite your friends. Copy. Yeah, thanks for noticing, Wings of Cheese. It has like a few more subs here and there. Hey, wipes tear, MysterE, so proud. There you go. There it is. Yeah, I saw that stuff with YouTube. Not recommending your stuff. Yeah, it's just the aim of the game. Like, I don't think it's me personally. I think it's just YouTube, man. They seem to be like that. All right. So, where were we? Martin Jacques.
China was how, with this vast country, could they transform
it? It is fucking huge. Seriously.
And they made quite a few false moves and false starts. So when Deng Xiaoping came to power...
I think that's a good point. See, false moves, false starts. Like, everyone just, like, especially right-wing people are just like, China, Russia, like, they failed. Ha, ha, ha. We should never try communism or socialism again. It's just like, well, like, how do you ever progress as an individual human or as a human race without, like, trialing things, seeing how they go, and then trying them again? Like, it's fundamentally human. It'd be like if you had a small child, like a niece or a nephew, or if you have a son or a daughter or something like that, and you're trying to teach them to walk, and they keep falling over, and you're like, well, you know what? Never walk again. If you can't do it, just don't even bother, like, kind of thing. It's just stupid. It's just really stupid and inhumane, I would say, that type of rhetoric.
In 1978, he identified the two crucial tasks of China. The first was an overwhelming focus on the need for economic growth, and secondly, intimately tied to that, was the need for a huge reduction in poverty in a poverty-stricken country. At that time in 1978, the Chinese economy was 1/20 of the size of the American economy. And since that move from the end of the 70s in the direction of economic reform, we have seen the most remarkable economic transformation in human history. A population of 1.3 billion people,
That's pretty much the philosophy or the ethos behind that thinking, right? Well, I'll just, let's just drag people around then if they can't walk and learn for themselves. Like, that's not the right direction in that thinking. It's like, no, we try again, and we try to progress humanity and develop further. We don't just give up and drag people around and like drag ourselves around as a species. We need to do better.
1/5 of humanity, its economy growing at 10% a year, to the point where today the Chinese economy is half the size of the American economy.
This is 12 years ago.
There's a general view now that the Chinese economy will overtake the American economy in size around about 2018.
I wonder if that's true. I wonder if that's actually true. It's insane. Like, yeah, the growth of China, if that's what you mean, is insane. It is insane. It is insane. Like 10%, like in usual capitalist kind of production, just to keep a healthy capitalist economy going, to be able to compensate for the profit motive, you need 3% growth a year. So compounding 3% growth every year. So that's big in itself. Like if you think about how it compounds. So 10%, that's more than 3 times what is considered a desirable growth rate for any type of society living under a capitalist mode of production. That's mental.
Is truly remarkable. And I want to correct you, Anson, because it's just not true that the British experience or the American experience of industrialization in any way compares with the Chinese achievement. The British
Are you ready for some truth bombs here? Watch this. This is the truth, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you pay attention to that.
Revolution between 1780 and 1830, which was the key period, or you can push it to 1840, the growth rate was around about, on average, 1.5% a year. 1.5% a year. And that was a population of, what, 20, 30 million at that time, probably more like 20 million at that time. Or take America. You mentioned America. Well, the period between the end of the Civil War, the mid-1860s, to 1914, the American growth rate never exceeded, on average, something like 3.5%. And that, of course, again, was a much smaller population.
And that's a good rate.
So that is why I suggest that this is the most remarkable economic transformation there has ever been. And it has been presided...
Now, let me just stop him on that, because he falls short of explaining why. Just in case, like, anyone tries to, like, or wants to perceive this live stream or this video as just being, like, unconditionally pro-Chinese. Like, the Chinese weren't developing in 1860 or 1790. They're doing it in the end of the 20th century. So, like, their conditions, the development of the capitalist system, the development of industrial society as a totality on a global scale was at a certain point to allow them to reach 10% growth patterns. They didn't do it in a vacuum. They were doing it with foreign capital flying into their market and, like, you know, absolutely transforming their economy. But they still did it anyway, which is the achievement he's talking about, but they did it in the context of a global community. I just want to make that clear. They didn't do it alone. They did something remarkable, but they didn't do it in a bubble.
Handed over by the Chinese government. And it has lifted. I mean, let's remember this as well. If you look at the reduction in global poverty over the last 30 years,
listen to this.
China is responsible for the overwhelming bulk of that reduction in poverty. If you take China out of the equation, actually the global performance has been very disappointing.
Can we just like stop to take that one in, like what he just said there? Like, he just explained that global poverty, like this measure that everyone uses for capitalism, like your hardcore like right-wingers out there and all that sort of stuff. Like, I saw a debate between, or like sections of the debate anyway, between Zizek and Jordan Peterson. And like basically the summary of the debate was something along the lines of like whether capitalism or socialism was better or something like that. Anyway, like Jordan Peterson's main argument, like the whole time he was running through that conversation, was like capitalism is so good because it's, you know, released everyone, it's lifted the world out of poverty. And that was like his explanation for like why capitalism is so good. Like if you look and you measure the world in terms of like its growth, and like the way that people have had increased living standards and been, you know, pulled out of living in absolute poverty, like for the last, you know, so many thousands of years, capitalism is the thing that has changed the game, like significantly changed the game. And it's just like, well, you have old Martin Jacques over here, Jacques, who's just like, well, actually, it was China pulling their population of more than 1 billion people out of poverty. And like, if China didn't do that, if China didn't develop itself along its own path with its communistic principles, it would have like this idea that capitalism has raised living standards and pulled people out of poverty wouldn't hold. So if you take China out of the equation, then like capitalism has done a pretty shit job of rising people out of poverty. It is actually the Chinese and their planned economic system that has raised people out of poverty in such a way that we can measure it on a global scale and say, oh, thank you, capitalism. So that one argument that Jordan Peterson had, that running through this entire debate about why capitalism is so fucking awesome, and like every right-wing commentator has the exact same talking point on this one. Oh yeah, well, you know, capitalism, hey, it's raised everyone out of poverty. And it's just like, well, apparently not. Apparently it was China that did that. And if we go, wings of cheese, off our definition from before, that China is effectively anti-capitalist, it is an anti-capitalist organization of society that has given the statistics the skew that capitalism has saved the world from extreme poverty. No. It was the Chinese. It was the Chinese that have given this perception that capitalism is just so fucking wonderful. Isn't that absolutely amazing? I can't wait for the next right-wing douchebag that comes along, you know, all self-righteous in a comment or wants to have a debate about why capitalism is so and awesome because it's raised everyone out of poverty, and just be like, well, you go fact check this one for me, because if it wasn't for China, lifting their population out of poverty, you wouldn't be able to gloat about that amazing statistic. An alternative to capitalism with its planned economy. Yeah, planned economics. That's a good point, Wings of Cheese. Planned economics lifted people out of poverty, not your precious free market. So go fuck yourself. Yes, I like that comment. Thank you, Wings of Cheese. You get me. You get me, dog.
Let's remember this as well. If you look at the reduction in global poverty over the last 30 years, China is responsible for the overwhelming bulk of that reduction in poverty. If you take China out of the equation, actually the global performance has been very disappointing. Now, I challenge the view that the Chinese government does not enjoy the support of overwhelming mass of Chinese people. I don't know, you know, if you look at, for example, the Pew Global Attitude Surveys, the support for the Chinese government is extraordinarily impressive. If you look at Tony Saitch's work from the Harvard Kennedy School in terms of the levels of satisfaction amongst the Chinese in terms of their government, you know, the ratings are extremely high indeed. And is it so surprising? If your living standards are growing, as they have been now for a while, at roughly the same pace of economic growth, 10% a year, then, you know, it's quite likely that your population...
I think this is a really interesting point too, because like there is definitely this perception in the West, right, that like, I don't know, China is like this totalitarian regime, and like everyone kind of like is very scared about doing anything against the government, and like because they're all living in a state of fear, they really are unhappy, and they probably hate their lives and they hate the government and stuff like that, but they're just too scared to say anything. That's the Western narrative. And like what he is saying here, he's just like completely debunking that narrative, just like blowing it out of the water, absolutely destroying it. And he's just saying, well, no, they're actually quite happy with the way the government's working. It's like it's gone from success to success since the 70s. And like people are generally pretty happy with the way things are going. They're not upset. They're not upset at all. They're happy with their style of governance. And like I said, that is completely contradictory to the Western narrative. Now, I remember like speaking to a very good friend of mine who is a university lecturer, and he has a large intake of Chinese students. And like when his Chinese students come along, I can't and like, you know, they talk to him about like you know, enjoying studying in Australia and all that sort of stuff, and like being able to do, you know, enjoy the student lifestyle that Australia offers. Like I've asked him, and I'm just like, well, what do they say about China? Like, you know, what's it like over there? Are they basically, is this a form of escapism? Are they over here because like they can't put up with like, you know, this evil Chinese existence that they're all subjected to, etc., etc. And he's like, you know, it's like it's not conclusive, but like, you know, half of them are just very, very pro-Chinese, and they love China and they can't wait to go home. They're just studying and they're waiting, they're itching to get home. And the other half are like, yeah, it's liberal here. I can kind of do whatever I want. I want to stay in Australia. So like that's pretty balanced, right? Like any country, if you migrated to a country to study, like half of the people that would go there, they'd miss home and they'd want to go back, and the other half would be like, oh god, I love being in a foreign country. This is where I'm vibing. I love this place and I want to stay here. So like, it's not that unusual, the response. Like if it was really that crazy and oppressive, you'd have like most of the people responding in a way that would be like, no, I need to escape. Or like they'd be too scared to respond and they'd be like, please don't ask me a question, like kind of thing, you know. And like it doesn't seem to be the case. It doesn't seem to be the case. So like I'm not saying though that like, you know, there isn't a authoritarian level over there that we are not used to in like, you know, like explicitly used to in Western societies and liberal democratic societies, but like, you know, it doesn't seem as scary as what like the Western narrative is all about. And that's what old Jacques is pointing out here.
Is going to be rather pleased with government. And I challenge the idea also that,
you challenge
the political, of course, there are many things that are different from what we're used to, which we would certainly object to. But the idea that the sort of political atmosphere, the political environment is frozen is a mistake. I mean, the idea that you said dissent is crushed. Excuse me, I mean, there are about 150,000 mass incidents every year in China in which people, which mainly consists of farmers objecting to what they regard to be the illicit seizure of their land by local government, flogging it off to property developers. And these actions are, they're reported in lots of places, and they take place, and it's not true that they're all suppressed. And sometimes when there is suppression, like in Wuhan, actually the authorities are forced to retreat or take the wave of strikes.
See, this is an interesting point too, because like the Western narrative is like very, very hardcore on this idea that like, yeah, any type of dissent in China is like crushed with the full force of like, I don't know, Xi Jinping's, you know, private guard or something like that. Like that's the narrative, right? But like, I don't know. Like I was doing some reading on like the Tiananmen Square incident, which is like very, very famous. And like I thought it was like kind of a one-off kind of student protest. But like it happened over like a 2 to 3 month period. And like, you know, it started off with like 50,000 students entering Tiananmen Square, which is like kind of like an area of like, I guess you would say governance. It's like Canberra. let's say, and Canberra has, you know, Government House and like other civic institutions. It's very official, all that sort of stuff. So Tiananmen Square is like this square and this open area that is lined with governmental buildings and all that sort of stuff. And like these students entered the square in like, you know, the 80s. So it's not like, you know, it's not like it was completely, I don't know, a liberal and open market society at that point. Like it was still, you know, fairly communist. And so like you would have thought, or like the narrative would have been it was very, very oppressive and all that sort of stuff. And like, you know, they sat down and they occupied this square for like a couple of months. And like it went from like 50,000 people to being like 150,000 people at a time. That's like, you know, that's like a few football stadiums full, like chockers full of people, like, you know, protesting stuff on a daily basis over a 2-month period. And the government's kind of just like, what should we do? Like, kind of thing. They weren't just like, let's just send in the tanks and start crushing people. They waited a few months and it was like a back and forth and all that sort of stuff. And it was when the workers got involved. So the workers started getting involved with the students. And the working populations were like, yeah, we want better conditions and all this sort of stuff. We actually, part of the stuff that the workers were talking about actually was like, we want to go back to Mao's China. We want to go back to a time where like workers had a little bit more like say and autonomy in things, because like they were like their businesses were controlled by the state as opposed to being owned like half and half by state-owned enterprises and capitalists and stuff like that. So they wanted to return to state ownership as opposed to like free market principles. And so like the workers started getting involved, and it, like, yeah, numbers started swelling from, you know, the tens of thousands to like, you know, the hundreds of thousands. I had an acquaintance in college who was in a Mandarin class. I left shortly after because I changed courses, and he was born in Sydney and was raised, I think, in Shanghai. He loved China. It was a home. Like, he didn't hate China. It seemed like he loved it there. And, you know, this is why I brought up the story about like this lecturer friend of mine, because he sees a good intake of like real, you know, home mainland Chinese people coming through, not like Hong Kong Chinese people or something like that, people that have like, you know, tried to rally against the bureaucratic state machine and resist Chinese mainland takeover, but like mainland Chinese people. And like, you know, the sentiment is not like this scary oppressive regime that they're trying to escape from. It's just like a usual casual kind of liberal democratic society, and like some of them love it, some of them hate it. And like, you know, some of them can't wait to get home, and some of them just want to hang out and be students in Australia. So like, it's a pretty general kind of 21st century narrative of like the usual young person seeking, like, you know, going global and studying abroad. It doesn't seem really that strange what is happening. There doesn't seem to be anything nefarious going on over there. And like, why not? Everybody has a lot of swells with patriotic pride every now and again, so like, why would the Chinese be any different? And it's an interesting take, because like I said, we don't get this Western narrative over here. So I can't remember what I was talking about. Oh no, Tiananmen Square, that's right. So like the workers got involved, and when the workers started swelling and asking for like working condition changes, that was different. So the students were kind of just like, hey, this was like the, you know, the future intellectual class that entertained them, kind of thing. But like when the workers got involved, they were kind of just like, hey, this is going to get a bit sketchy, because like this could like start to break away. Basically, this could take a life of its own. NP life apologist, what the fuck? Question mark. Are you asking what we're talking about, or like, do you have a comment on what we're talking about specifically? I'll leave it up to you to fill in the gaps there, so we know what you're objecting to or confused by potentially. Yeah, so like they started to get worried that like this was going to spread to more and more workers' communities across the mainland of China, and then like that would cause some type of, you know, general strike situation, and they were like crap, we gotta do something about this. And so like the Chinese Communist Party, like the elite part of the Communist Party, came in and tried to have a meeting with the students and the workers, and that went really bad, really fast. My comment isn't there. Oh. Well, look, I don't know, man. YouTube is drunk. I don't know if YouTube is drunk or if YouTube is censoring things. Because like I've had that happen before, and like there's lots of people that will write comments to me on videos and stuff, and they're just like, I tried to write the same thing 6 times, and like I can't get it through. I'm sick of this, like kind of thing. I'll message you separately. Look, if YouTube is being drunk, let me suggest this to you. I'm going to give you the Discord link, and if you want to put it, like join up to that and put your comment in there, I'll try to find a way of reading it, and then like I'll call it out in the live stream so we can talk about it, if you're interested, unless you're already in the Discord and I don't recognize your name. So apologies if you are, but like I'll keep an eye on Discord if you want, or you can just tell me if you do that, then I can read out your comment for you. But yeah, surprisingly, they like once the workers got involved, the Chinese were like, cheers, I'll try another account first. Okay. Yeah, so like basically the Chinese government was kind of like, we gotta suppress this now. And that's when they sent in the tanks, and there was that whole famous like image of the student standing up to the tank and, you know, getting crushed and all that sort of stuff. And they killed like 1,000 people, which was, you know, pretty fucking hardcore, let's be honest. But like it wasn't like this thing like people just rose up and like the next day they sent in the tanks and like killed 1,000 people. Like it happened over like a while. And like that's not really the sense and the narrative that you get from the story. Serpentza and China Uncensored, both good channels. Okay. Did you know they recently modified the Bible to make it so that J-Man stones a woman to death? Who modified the Bible? What, these 2 channels that you're talking about? Or like, you mean like the Catholic Church reissued the Bible and changed some of the stories? Because that'd be pretty interesting if they did. Like, or maybe they added a few new, what are they called? Books, I guess, or sections of the Bible. Anyway, so like the Tiananmen Square incident is not as like dramatic from an oppressive authoritarian narrative standpoint as like we were led to believe. China CCP, it is in one of the China Uncensored videos. Okay, fair enough. I will have to check out China Uncensored though. Thank you. Sorry, is this the same? Did you just switch accounts and like now you're able to put in the comment that you wanted to put in before? Or is this another commenter altogether? I'm not across that. Anyway, Tiananmen Square. It's a good example because it's the thing that the Western world looks to. Shh, yeah. Oh, right. Got it. Shh. Look at me trying to be subtle. Yeah, Tiananmen Square. Eh? Like that's like the big centerpiece of this kind of like this global narrative on like how hardcore and oppressive China is. But like, you know, when you look at the details of it, like it doesn't kind of fit like this very, very hardcore repressive regime that doesn't allow any dissent, which is what he's talking about. Like from what I understand is they do protest, they do rally against the system. They don't have the ability to strike in the same way, because like they don't even have like proper unions from what I understand over there. They have like one union that is kind of controlled by the CCP, and like everyone's part of this like one union, so it's kind of like underhanded because it's really just controlled by the state, and it doesn't actually allow the workers to have any of the actual benefits of actually forming their own unions and workers organizations, which sucks, don't get me wrong. But But let me just say this, and I can only use this in the Australian example. So if anyone else is like outside of Australia listening on this and they want to tell me otherwise or fact check this or something like that for me, in Australia, you can't just, demonstrate your workers' rights unconditionally either. Okay, so like, yeah, okay, we have the right to form a union in Australia, and there are numerous unions out there, and people can, make a union today and break it up tomorrow, or it can be cannibalized by one of the larger unions, and they become a larger bureaucratic machine and all that sort of stuff. But those unions, those bureaucratic machines themselves, don't get to just say to their workers, "Let's have a vote, and you want to go on strike tomorrow? Let's go on strike." No, no, we have an Industrial Relations Commission. Okay, especially in the state of New South Wales. I don't know about the other states, or if this is a federal body, but there is an Industrial Relations Commission. And if you want to go on strike, and if you want to, exercise your right as a worker in a liberal and free society, you can't just call a strike whenever you feel like it. You have to apply. You have to fill out paperwork to the government and say, please, can we demonstrate? Please, can we exercise our rights as free individuals? And they can turn around and say no. They can say no, or they'll do it when it's convenient for the economy. So basically when it's convenient for the capitalist machine. And so like we might sit here on a pedestal and say, hey, well, China, doesn't have, like, people can't form unions. They can't do whatever they want. Well, you can't do whatever you want in, free Australia either. If you are, part of a union, well, that union is subject to the control of the government anyway. So it's just the way that you look at it, which is the narrative and the story that, is the perspective that this guy is giving us. You get thank you. And if you put a foot out of line, like the CFMEU, like you become too powerful as an organization, the media demonizes you, and then you get put under administration. Thank you, wings of cheese. I forgot about that. How could I forget? That's a really good point. Yeah. So like, not so different, eh? Us liberal democracies and the old Communist Party of China, apparently. Not so different.
Guangdong province and along the eastern coast in Shanghai in 2010 and 2011. Tens and tens of thousands of people on strike. And they were not suppressed. They were allowed to happen. And the result, huge wage increases. The minimum wage in Beijing was increased during that period by 30%, Shanghai roughly similar, and so on. Huge lift in living standard. So it's not good enough, to be frank, to paint China as this sort of autocracy with a central government which suppresses everything. There has been a huge shift in the personal freedoms of the average Chinese since the death of Mao. You've only got to go to Shanghai or to Guangzhou or to Chengdu and you can see it on the streets. And it's not true that everything is censored. Actually, the censorship in China is much lighter than it used to be, much lighter. And the access to information, sure, there are controls on the internet, but quite frankly, if you want to, you can get around them. So this is a society which is throbbing, actually, and is vibrating with
the coming war on China is a good film too, but I still kind of don't trust it. Well, like, yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's a good point. Like, in the same way that us revolutionaries, like, would question any state organization and not trust really any government or politician. Like, it's just a general vibe that you get from the way that our capitalist world structure is formulated. The social relations that give us the political levers of power are just not to be trusted generally. But to think and to have the narrative that is painted that like somehow the Chinese system is somehow more nefarious or questionable than our trusted liberal democratic societies over here, that kind of assumption, that is questionable. That is questionable. I don't think they're so different at the end of the day.
debate, contrary to the picture that Anson has presented, which is a very common picture presented to Western audiences. I wanted to just say something else. You see, my concentration in what I want to say is really about China as a developing country. Now, let's take a comparative example, India.
Let's do it, Martin.
In 1950, which has got, in many ways, a most impressive democracy. In 1950, the Chinese economy and the Indian economy were more or less the same size. Today, the Chinese economy is 4 times the size of the Indian economy. Why? Because the economic strategy pursued by the Chinese has been far more successful than the strategy which has been employed by India. And India has a great problem. It's got a most impressive democracy, which is what we celebrate, and an extremely corrupt and inefficient state, which cannot deliver. In other words, in that sense, it's opposite to China.
And well, let's all hail democracy, even if it's corrupt and inefficient. It's like when the Americans decide to bring, freedom to some country that really needs it, right? It's the same type of ideal. It's the same type of notion. Democracy at any cost. Doesn't matter if it's shit or not. Well, it's absurd people think that, not just questionable, their consent is manufactured by the press. Yes. And I think the press and the mainstream medium is so instrumental in painting this picture of the scary Chinese and stuff like that. Because if you look at it from a capitalist analysis perspective, their class interests, the capitalist class interests in the West, are antithetical to the potential class interests of the Chinese state. Because, as we will debate with the AI very, very shortly, China is challenging America's hegemony on an economic basis. And so it's good to have always in your back pocket the mainstream media feeding the narrative and the fear out there that China is public enemy number 1, just in case they ever need to pull the plug and go into all out aggressive attack on China mode. People and public opinion is already leaning that way and is already basically receptive to that type of sentiment because the American capitalist class, the Western capitalist class, is fundamentally threatened by the economic prowess of the Chinese economic machine. And it challenges not fundamentally just in the sense that it fundamentally challenges them because it's economically challenging them. It might take away their capital from them, but it also challenges them in the sense of its philosophy. It challenges the free market principle and challenges it really well because it plans stuff and centralizes governance and all that sort of stuff, as opposed to just allowing, the capitalist class to dictate to the political class kind of what direction they're going to go in and stuff like that, which is pretty much how the American society works. The large capitalist interests, especially the financial institutions like the big banks, and Wall Street and stuff like that, really dictate to the governmental sector how to run things, where China is the opposite. Their state bureaucracy dictates to their financial institutions and their big corporations which direction they're going to go. At the same time, China be pissing off India, Japan, Philippines, saying they own the Southern Seas, and Australia. Yeah, it's a good point. I think it's interesting though, because I talked to somebody else about this recently. They were just here they are pissing off India and stuff like that. And it's just yes, they have traditionally, had poor relations with India, but recently at the most recent BRICS summit, so the story goes, is that China and India made up, and they've agreed to, on certain areas and settled their border dispute along the Himalaya region and stuff like that. So maybe this whole India versus China thing is coming to a close, and they're going to start seeing more eye to eye, which would have huge ramifications geopolitically. Huge ramifications, because the Americans have always wanted to use India to their interests as a wedge against China as part of their containment policy. You control the Indians and keep them adversarial to China, and then you can contain them that way. But like, if China and India sort themselves out, then like China can move westward much more easily than they could ever do. And they don't need to rely kind of on any other country, or any other shipping route or trade route or something like that to go west. And so like it's been a keen interest for the Americans to stifle that animosity between China and India. But like they seem to have come to some type of agreement recently. So we'll see how that unfolds. In terms of Japan, well, like that is as old as time itself. The Japanese and the Chinese have just been killing each other en masse for hundreds and hundreds of years. So you're never going to get rid of that one. The Philippines, you know, I don't know too much about that. I'll have to read up on it. And like Australia, like, I don't know, has Australia really been pissed off by the Chinese? Or is that like saber rattling again, spurred on by our media here and like the likes of like Peter Dutton and co, so they can like fearmonger Australians into voting for basically a right-wing government, to bring in some hardcore right-wing authoritarian measures. I would say that it's more of that. They're using the evil and scary China narrative to try and scare people into voting for right-wing governments, etc., etc. So like, yeah. Anyway, let us continue, shall we? Continue. On with Martin's, scathing critique of Western perspectives on China. Because I really want to get to this debate. This has taken like a 10-minute video. It's taken a lot longer than I thought it would be. But like, thanks for bearing
The poverty reduction in China has been far, anyone who goes to China, goes to India can see this, has been far more successful than anything that has been achieved in India. Now, I think also we need a bit of humility about this. China is a huge, as Weiwei pointed out, huge country on a scale that is unimaginable to us in the West. So its task has been it has been an industrial revolution, essentially. Economic takeoff, as Rostow described it, the shift from the countryside to industry.
Oh my
Those
God.
were the days.
It's a nice time for me to do a plug. If you're enjoying this content, you like this live stream, you like my stuff generally, I am on Patreon. I can put a link in the chat for you. Please, if you can help me out financially, that would be great. I need it, obviously, to pay for YouTube Premium, so I still get ads on my live streams. Alternatively to that, if you just want to join up for free and become a member, that'd be good, because like I can start a community over there. I can have an open communication channel with you that I can't have on YouTube, because YouTube just doesn't notify people. So let me just quickly put my my Patreon details, or my link to my Patreon, in the chat. And if you would graciously go over and join for free, or go over and financially support the movement, I would be forever in your debt, etc., etc. You know the banter and the rhetoric. Please go over and join up. All right, let's go back.
It was not much more than 20% of the population lived in the urban centres. Today, it's 50%. Now, what was the situation politically, in the West, in Europe, in the United States, when we were having our industrial revolutions? How many Western countries were democracies at the time of their industrial revolutions? Shall I tell you how many?
Come on.
Zero. In Britain, in 1850, finally, 1/5 of men had the right to vote. That was after the conclusion of the Industrial Revolution. And it was not until the 1880s that most men had the vote, but not women. Or take America. It was not until 1860 that most white men gained the vote, but not blacks really until the 1960s, and women in 1920. And if you look at Europe, exactly the same pattern. Their industrial revolutions were accomplished essentially in France, in Germany, in Italy, and so on, before.
I think this is a really good point. Okay, so like when you industrialize, like if you look historical materialist perspective, let's look at it. Let's actually look at what happens when you industrialize. Well, for the West, there was no democracy, as we would call it today, liberal democracy, like right to enfranchisement for the entire population, the entire adult citizenry or something like that. No. It was just like literally in America and like England and stuff like that, it was like if you were in the property owning class or if you were like an aristocrat or something like that, fine, you could vote. No one else, especially not the working class. And then maybe a little bit later after they industrialized, they started allowing everybody else to vote. But definitely not democracy in our sense. It was a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, of the property owning class, the wealth owning class. It was a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. And like in China, you have a dictatorship of the state. Okay, so like not that different. They're not liberal democratic societies, the ones that are industrializing nations and bringing them onto the global stage. I think that's a fucking awesome point. Like it really puts things into perspective. It really, really grounds like your opinions on things, I find.
They had democracy. So when we say they should be like us, well, actually, we should speak with more modesty, because we weren't like what we want them to be during this particular historical phase. I would like to conclude by just saying this. First of all, I would ask my country to be more modest.
What do you reckon he is, like British or something? Must be.
In the face of China's extraordinary achievement. And not think our task is to say, like why the hell can't you be like us? But on the contrary, I think what we need with the rise of China is a much more humble attitude, which recognizes and respects their achievement and also is willing to learn from them. And what we're going to face, I think, now is not just feeling that democracy is important, but also we need to learn from the Chinese about state competence. This is not a subject that's been discussed in the West, but it will be discussed in the West. And
state competence. Okay, so this is the idea. I think what he's saying nicely when he says state competence is it's an interesting argument, but to me, it's more important to focus on what is happening now instead of, say, 100 years ago. If they're doing crimes, they should be exposed. Yeah, absolutely. We have different international standards. Absolutely. In today's, we have different ethical measures and ethical standards. So yes, if they are doing wrong by their people internally, or something like that, which is the usual conversation that happens about China, is like they're being oppressive and all that sort of stuff, or they're subjugating a certain nation or group of individuals, an ethnic minority, to re-education and just outright repression, then like they should be held accountable for that. I agree. And also in the West, we should be held to the same measure. We should be, as a global community, holding Israel to account for its crimes against Palestine, let's say. So like we should all stand up as a global community because we have these high ethical standards and say, no, Israel, that's enough. Leave the Palestinians alone. Go back into your settlements and leave the Palestinians alone. Like we should all be holding everyone to a high standard, not just the Chinese. So like I agree 100% with what you're saying, Matter Dirk. I agree. We should hold them to a high standard, as we should hold everyone to a high standard. Because like the Americans and stuff like that, just because they do things covertly and like they suppress ethnic groups covertly, through like setting up fascist dictatorships throughout, you know, South America, or assassinating political dissenters in areas that don't agree with, you know, free market principles and stuff like that. I think we should hold the West to this high ethical standard as well, as opposed to pretending like China is like the only group of people out there that I don't know, they do the wrong thing to ethnic minorities and things like that. So, in saying that, let's just let him finish off, and so I can get to my debate with.
Here we have much to learn from the Chinese.
Oh, yeah, the state thing. The state thing. Look, I think what he's trying to say, without saying it in the way that I would like him to say it, or maybe he's just trying to imply it or do it implicitly, is that central planning is the way to go in the modern capitalist world. Capitalism has reached a point where the anarchy of the free market is problematic, and like the contradictions of capitalism have heightened to a certain point where they're causing lots of problems, lots of turmoil. And like you have to kind of plan your way out of certain situations if you want to keep this capitalist mode of doing things going. But if you want to see capitalism crash and burn, let's not plan anything and let it eat itself so we can have some type of social revolution. I'm all for that option too. Let me just say subtly, if that was subtle. Probably wasn't that subtle, but whatever. All right, let's not touch that. Let's get the screen capture. Hopefully you can see this well enough. That's big enough for you. Let's talk to ChatGPT now about China. All right. So let's give it some context to start off our debate, shall we? Who have we got in the chat, by the way? We've got a couple of viewers watching. If you haven't introduced yourself, please do so. We're going to start debating ChatGPT about China. And we're going to, you know, push the envelope of the narrative in the West about China and see what ChatGPT has to say about our counter narrative to the Western narrative, and see if ChatGPT can kind of resolve some of the issues of the counter narrative, or just blow them out of the water and say, no, you've gotten it wrong. The Western narrative about China is 100% right. So let's start with that. Good morning, ChatGPT. No, it's not. It's not typing. Oh, there it is. Good morning, ChatGPT. Full stop. I would like to have a discussion with you about the rise of China and its threat to US hegemony. Full stop. I would like to take the position that the Western narrative on China is based on fear mongering. And I would like you to take up a contrary position and defend the Western narrative that China is authoritarian, repressive, and cannot be trusted. Full stop. Can you please start the debate with a few points in support of your position that I can respond to? ? Please keep these points as brief as possible. Full stop. All right, let's do this. Hello, Beatrice. Welcome. Welcome to the chat. What time is it over where you are? And are you living in the past still? Is it still Wednesday? All right, let's see what ChatGPT has given us. It is a her, I'm pretty sure, because David asked me the other day if I can change the voice to make it like sound less robotic, or maybe change the gender of it. But I like having it as a girl for now, as a feminine voice. And so like I can't change it anyway. I might have to get some type of premium plan for that, which I don't have the resources for. So another shameless plug from me. If you'd like to financially support me, please go over to Patreon and do so. Then I can get YouTube Premium and I can get a higher level of ChatGPT. Maybe I can change the voice up a little bit. All right, let's see what she has to say, shall
we? Good morning. I'll take the position defending the Western narrative and start with these points. 1. Authoritarian governance. China operates as a one-party state under the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, suppressing political dissent, limiting freedom of speech, and centralizing power in an opaque manner, raising concerns about its global intention. 2. Human rights abuses. Allegations of repression in Xinjiang, including the treatment of Uyghur Muslims, widespread surveillance and suppression of minorities, showcase China's disregard for fundamental human rights. 3. Aggressive geopolitics. China's actions in the South China Sea, including the militarization of artificial islands and disregard for international rulings, reflect an expansionist approach threatening regional stability. 4. Economic coercion. Through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, China uses debt diplomacy to exert influence over developing nations, which some argue undermines their sovereignty. 5. Global surveillance export. China's export of surveillance technologies to other nations spreads tools for authoritarian control, suggesting an ideological and strategic alignment with repressive governance models. Let's begin. How would you respond to these claims?
Let's begin. Thank you, ChatGPT. That was lovely. Beatrice, Wednesday night right now. And what is it? 9 o'clock, 9:22. Well, welcome to the conversation. We've just spent like the last, I don't know, like hour and a half going through like we actually went through some of the chat on a video that I put out recently that went went a bit off the charts by my standards. It got like 1,500 views and stuff like that. It's got a lot of comments. It was quite controversial. It's pissed people off, but it's about kind of China not being really socialist. And then like we looked at this guy explain like the rise of China and like how we should consider China from a Western perspective, as opposed to just beating them up all the time in the media and making them out like that there's some evil and oppressive regime. And now we're going to debate ChatGPT on that. We're gonna get that Western narrative and get ChatGPT to defend the Western narrative, and we're going to try and pull the Western narrative apart. I don't know what the Brazilian perspective is on China. So like Brazil and China are in BRICS together. So it'd be interesting to know your thoughts, Beatrice, if you have any thoughts on China, or like if there's a sentiment in Brazil about what China is like. Like if you could, let us know what that is. It'd be interesting to know your thoughts on it. But like, let's go with point number 1, shall we? Let's see if we can counter this claim in point number 1, which is authoritarian governance. So China operates as a one-party state under the Chinese Communist Party, suppressing political dissent, limiting freedoms, and centralizing power in an opaque manner, raising concerns about its global intentions. I think that's a massive reach to say that like internal political organization means that it's going to be bad for the globe. I don't know what she's insinuating there, that like, oh, if you look at the way they treat their people, then like they just want to take over the world and treat everyone like that. If that's the point that she's trying to make here, it's a bit of a long bow that she's stretching there. Thank you very much for the response. Ooh. Thank you very much for the response. I would like to respond to each of your points individually. Full stop. Let's start with point number 1. Full stop. It is true that China has a one-party system. I would argue, though, that this is not much different to the way that liberal democracies run in practice as opposed to how they run in theory. Full stop. Let me explain. Full stop. Liberal democratic societies of the West usually have a few political parties, if not only two major political parties that are the typical runners in democratic elections. Full stop. This is for a variety of reasons, but usually it comes down to the cost of running politically. Full stop. And so you have a system where you have very limited political parties within a governance system. Full stop. Let us take the US as an example. Full stop. The US has a two-party system. And it is not an unusual critique of that system that these two parties are really just two wings of the same party, which represents the interests of the American capitalist class. Full stop. And every couple of years, well, I should say, four years, it potentially changes. Full stop. Can you please respond to this notion as briefly as possible, ensuring that you take up a contrary position in your response? Question mark. All right, let's see how she responds. Let's see how she responds.
While it's true that Western liberal democracies, like the US, often function as two-party systems, there remains a critical distinction between these systems and China's one-party rule. Choice and accountability. In liberal democracies, even with limited viable parties, citizens retain the ability to form new political movements, vote out incumbents, and influence policy through activism, lobbying, or civil society. The political process, despite its flaws, allows for dissent, free media, and judicial independence, mechanisms to challenge the system. In contrast, China's one-party system prohibits opposition outright, criminalizes dissent, and lacks checks on the ruling party's power. Even if two US parties cater primarily to capitalist interests, citizens still have avenues for change, which are entirely absent in China's model. The comparison oversimplifies the fundamental differences in political freedom and pluralism.
Wasn't bad. Wasn't a bad response at all. Hey, can yourself and Freddie Jordan's accessory run for office? If the people take over and become proper politicians, it would be good. LOL. Imagine Jordan as Prime Minister. Fuck yeah. Yeah, could you imagine? Like, honestly, Jordan as Prime Minister? My God. I'll have to speak to him about that one, actually. That'd be pretty fun. I don't know. I don't know if he has the heart for politics, to be honest. Like, I think he's good as a political dissenting voice, and like is good at critical analysis, but like, you know, it takes a lot to be a politician. You have to be pretty ruthless, and you have to be able to withstand different types of like pressure from obviously a political perspective. And like, yeah, I think Jordan's more of a critical voice as opposed to a politically leading voice. But like, I'll ask him his perspective on that. But yeah, don't expect to see him running for office anytime soon. But yeah, I'll do it. Maybe he'll have to fund my political campaign, and I'm sure he'll be able to drum up some support for that. That's hilarious though. All right, let's respond to ChatGPT. Let's challenge her on some of these general assumptions that she's making. While I see your point about the Chinese model not allowing any type of political pluralism and having avenues for change, I would argue that this lies on an assumption that there is that ability in the Western liberal democratic societies that we have in reality, not in theory. Full stop. Like I said, the system is not designed to allow anybody to run politically. It only facilitates people that have the capital to run politically. Full stop. And so this is exclusionary by its very nature. Full stop. And so you could make the argument that it is a one-party system in that it only allows people with the right amount of money to engage in that system and have a political voice in the first place. Full stop. In terms of allowing for dissent, let us look at the American example, again with Julian Assange. Full stop. Political dissent of someone who was a foreigner and not even subject to their national laws was suppressed with absolute impunity and disregard for any type of ethical standard when it comes to political dissent. Full stop. Free media. I would argue that in the Western sense, media is caught up in the same capital trap. Full stop. If you have the financial resources, then you are allowed to get your message across. Full stop. I use for an example the case of manufacturing consent by Herman and Chomsky, who explain just how the free media in capitalist countries works. Full stop. In terms of judicial independence, I would argue again in liberal democracies that only those with the money required to traverse the law courts are able to have free reign in a judicial manner. Full stop. What I mean is if you have the money, you can challenge anything in a court of law. Full stop. That goes against the idea, the very liberal idea of blind justice. Full stop. And so I would argue that while on paper, liberal democratic societies appear freer than that of China under the Communist Party, it is not so in reality. Full stop. Do you have any final thoughts on what I have said? Question mark. Please keep your response brief and tend towards a contrary position. Well, this is interesting. What have you written there? Albo and Dutton, basically all of our PMs. If they can do it, literally anyone can. Yeah, within the political parties, absolutely. They have to go through an institution. You have to go through an institution. They didn't rise to become PMs and leaders of the opposition as independents. They have to go through the party machine, which is what she's talking about. She is talking about the fact that in China, the only way to get politically active is to go through the Communist Party. It's a one-party state. Okay, well, if you want to be politically active in China, then join the Communist Party. You join the Communist Party and you rise through the ranks. Like, that's the same deal in Australia. You really want to become Prime Minister? Well, join one of the two major political parties and rise through the ranks. And that's where you'll get the capital, the exposure, the brand recognition in order to make your, prime ministerial career ambitions come to life. But you're not going to do that independently, or it's going to be very, very difficult to do that. Almost as difficult as trying to do it in China. You'd have to basically revolutionize the political system to make that happen.
Your argument highlights systemic inequities in liberal democracies, but equating them to China's governance risks overlooking critical differences in degree and kind. While wealth undeniably skews access to political power and justice in liberal democracies, these systems still allow for grassroots movements, independent organizations, and citizen-led campaigns to challenge entrenched interests, successfully at times. Examples include civil rights movements, union actions, and progressive legislation driven by public pressure. China, by contrast, suppresses such independent organizing outright. Political participation, media, and the judiciary are explicitly and uniformly controlled by the Communist Party, leaving no room for even the limited challenges that are possible in capitalist democracies. While flawed, liberal democracies provide opportunities for incremental change, which are systematically absent in China's rigidly centralized system.
Okay, I'm not going to respond to her specifically, but we've just seen in the video with our friend Martin Jacques, that is not true. Like, the political system in China does still allow room for political dissent and grassroots community organizing. When the farmers are upset about the local government coming in and buying up land that belongs to farmers and stuff like that and trying to sell it off to developers, they strike, they protest, they get angry, and that causes waves politically through the Chinese system, which then has to be responded to via the government, and the government has to make changes. When the workers are really upset about something, despite the fact that they can't form unions, they do strike and they politically organize, and then the government has to respond. Either do they suppress them, which happens in the West, or do they respond to them and give them the new conditions that they're looking for, which has happened in China. They have definitely responded to things and made sure that they raise people's wages, they give them better working conditions and stuff like that. It's actually quite similar, the way that the two political systems respond to political dissent. It's just that, again, on paper, it's openly allowed in Western democratic societies, whereas on paper, it's not allowed in China. The difference is whether it's tolerated or not. And it would seem that in both situations, it's tolerated to a certain degree in both cases. In both cases, it's tolerated to a certain degree. To a certain degree. Let's conceptualize that. Let's remember that as we move forward. I'm not going to do all of these. I'm just going to do some. So if you guys have any opinions about which point you prefer about human rights abuses, aggressive geopolitics, economic coercion, global surveillance export, if you have any, I don't know, preferences, let me know what you think. I'm just going to change this so you can see the chat properly and actually see what people are writing. Yeah, if anyone has any preferences, let me know. But like, yeah, I'm going to go through and do, let's see what we should do next. Human rights abuses, allegations of repressions in Xinjiang, Uyghur Muslims, that one's been done to death. Let's not do that. Aggressive geopolitics in the South China Sea. Let's do that one. Okay. Aggressive geopolitics. We're going to look at like the Western narrative and its perspective on how China engages in aggressive politics and should be untrustworthy and considered absolutely abhorrent because of its aggressive geopolitics. Okay, let's get onto that one, shall we? Can we please move on to dot point number 3? Full stop. You have noted here that China's actions in the South China Sea, militarization, of islands and disregard of international rules represent China's expansionist interests and threats to the region. Full stop. I would argue that this must be looked at with a sense of relative comparison. Full stop. To not do so would be completely negligent. Full stop. Let me just start by saying China's actions in terms of militarizing sections of the South China Sea and disregarding international rulings are questionable and, from a global governance perspective, unethical. Full stop. However, this is not unusual when you think about geopolitics generally. Full stop. Everything that you have criticized China for, the US does on steroids. Full stop. Like, you literally cannot compare how aggressive the US is on all of the points and factors that you have used when you think about China being aggressive on the same grounds. Full stop. How do you respond to this? Question mark. Please be as brief as possible, and take up a contrary position.
While it's true that the US has a significant global military presence, there is a key distinction in the nature of China's actions in the South China Sea. Direct and immediate regional impact. China's construction of artificial islands and militarization occurs in a contested region, directly infringing on the territorial claims and economic zones of neighboring countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia. Its disregard for the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling undermines international law, creating instability in a critical trade route. By contrast, while the US operates globally, it typically acts under formal alliances or agreements, such as NATO, and its military presence is less focused on unilateral claims over contested resources or sovereignty. China's actions, on the other hand, suggest a bid for regional hegemony at the expense of its neighbours.
So basically, your argument is that China's bid for regional hegemony is so basically your argument is that China's bid for regional hegemony is unacceptable, but America's overt bid for global hegemony is acceptable? Question mark. Do you not see the problem with that logic? Question mark. Please briefly respond and try to take up a contrary position.
The distinction lies in the perception of intent and structure. The US, despite its flaws, frames its global presence as supporting a rules-based international order, often acting through alliances and multilateral institutions. This framing, though imperfect, provides a veneer of legitimacy and a degree of accountability. China's actions in the South China Sea, however, are unilateral, directly contravening international rulings and dismissing the concerns of its neighbours. While US global hegemony can be critiqued, it is often seen as less immediately destabilising to specific regions compared to China's actions, which directly erode trust and cooperation in Asia. The scale and nature of ambition differ in their impact and reception.
So basically, you don't see a problem in your logic, and that regional hegemony intentions and actions are worse than global hegemony intentions and actions. I would like to point out that the US in terms of its global dominance and your perception that it does what it does legally or through alliances is flawed. Full stop. The US will often disregard international law and the UN and do whatever it wants to do for its own strategic interests. Full stop. How do you respond to that? Question mark. Please respond briefly and take up a contrary position if necessary. I'm currently using ChatGPT. I haven't used Gemini. I've used ChatGPT and Claude so far, and I've used like a branch of Gemini through Notebook LM, which is like another one that's owned by Google. So like I'm not sure about Gemini, to be honest. Have you used Gemini at all? Let's see what her response is.
You're correct that the US has a history of disregarding international law when it suits its strategic interests. Examples like the Iraq invasion underline this. However, the US's actions often occur within a framework that includes justifications, however flawed, through multilateral institutions, and its soft power has historically fostered cooperation on global challenges like trade, climate, and security. China's approach in the South China Sea is viewed as uniquely destabilizing because it directly violates rulings like the 2016 arbitration, ignores neighboring states' sovereignty, and challenges the very rules-based order that facilitates global stability. While both nations act in self-interest, China's overt disregard for its regional peers escalates tensions in a way the US's broader hegemonic actions do not in the same immediate, localized context.
Well, basically, her position is just they don't do it regionally, so it's okay. And I think that's a pretty weak argument from ChatGPT, to be honest. Like, I must admit, like, okay, China's doing stuff in the South China Sea that shows that it's geopolitically aggressive, and it does it in a localized context. But when the Americans do it on a global context and show how aggressive they are, like in the case that she used with the Iraq invasion, which she said, you know, it's kind of, what did she say exactly? The actions often occur within a framework that includes justification, however flawed. So basically they were like trying to bring, what was it, democracy and freedom to Iraq and stuff like that. And like, that's what Bush was like, yeah, we're going to bring them some good old democracy and some good old freedom, like kind of thing. And you're just like, yeah, sure. You spread that democracy and freedom. And so it's like, she's acknowledging that it's done on a global scale, well outside of the American sphere of influence, like you would expect on like a regional or a proximity basis. Like it's literally on the other side of the world that they're doing these things, like challenging the Arabs in their own backyard. And that's okay. That's fine. But like China shouldn't do it because like they're doing it regionally. That's not okay. That's not okay. Well, like it's interesting. Like if you actually think and you listen to, I think it's like it's a group called ASEAN, which is like an Asian kind of like body, let's say. And like there's commentators in there. They look at like the economic and trade relations, the political relations in the Asia region. which China is a part of, and like Malaysia and the Philippines, and like Thailand and Vietnam, they're all part of this group basically. They all seem to be getting along pretty well at the moment. And a lot of those countries tried to sign up for BRICS, which China is obviously a key part of as well. So I would question this assumption that she's making about how China's actions in the South China Sea have basically destabilized the entire region and everybody hates China now. I would really question that narrative that she's got going on there. All right, that's enough for that point. I think we've kind of tested her limits as far as we can get them. Economic coercion initiatives, like the Belt and Road Initiative. China uses debt diplomacy to exploit. Like, let's look at like this one. Like, seriously, that's an argument for why China, like on the Western side, is evil. Wow, let's explore this one. ChatGPT. I must say that I am rather surprised by this point number 4, full stop. If you look at the history of global debt patterns, especially in the neoliberal era, all you will find is patterns of debt diplomacy being used over undeveloped nations or nations that find themselves in significant debt crisis situations. Full stop. And this debt diplomacy is instigated by the attack dog organization, the IMF, which is essentially controlled by US interests. Full stop. How can you honestly defend the notion that the Belt and Road Initiative by China is worse than any of the actions taken to debt trap societies throughout the neoliberal era as sanctioned by the Americans? Question mark. Please respond briefly and take up a contrary position if you think necessary. Full stop. Yeah, I've used Gemini before. It's nice, but I do prefer ones that glitch. LOL. Way more fun. Why you say full stop? Oh, I need to say full stop because the text-to-speech, speech-to-text program that I'm using, like if I want to stop a sentence to start a new one, I have to say full stop. So like it's clunky, I know. But like it's just the nature of the program I'm using. Unfortunately. Or fortunately, at least you know when my sentences start and stop when I'm speaking. Sorry if it's detracting though. Hello, I've got 3 viewers in the room. I don't know if you've already introduced yourselves in the chat, but if you haven't, please do so. Say hi so I know who's watching. If you're wondering what the hell is going on, I'm debating right now ChatGPT on the Western narrative, which is China evil, etc., based on certain points. And so I'm just challenging the narrative. I'm trying to get ChatGPT to defend the Western narrative, and like I am basically trying to poke holes in the Western narrative about China. Now, I was just curious why you're saying it. Oh, okay. As long as it's not distracting, because like sometimes it breaks my chain of thought, to be honest. But like I'm gonna have to try and figure out a more efficient way of debating with AI. But this is as efficient as I get for now.
While it's true that the IMF and US-led financial institutions have historically used debt to impose structural adjustments on developing nations, the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, presents its own set of concerns that are distinct in nature. Critics argue that Chinese loans often lack transparency, include terms favouring Chinese contractors, and lead to the forfeiture of strategic assets when debts cannot be repaid, as seen in Sri Lanka's Hambantota port. Unlike the IMF, which ties loans to governance reforms, however controversial, BRI loans prioritise infrastructure that often benefits China strategically, creating a new form of dependency. Both systems have flaws, but the BRI is perceived as leveraging debt to assert direct geopolitical influence in ways that parallel and, in some cases, exacerbate the inequities of Western debt diplomacy.
That's really interesting. Okay, I'm going to challenge her on this. I'm really going to challenge her on this because I don't like what she said there. I get your point. I get your point that China uses the Belt and Road Initiative to pour money into infrastructure that will benefit China strategically, in the sense that if the country cannot pay back their debts, then China assumes control of that infrastructure. Full stop. That will be strategically important moving forward because it means that China will have control over infrastructure in other people's countries. Full stop. However, that will mean nothing in the face of a country that decides to, by force, take back its own infrastructure, which it can do because China doesn't have military bases that go along with this infrastructure to physically enforce their control. Full stop. Their control over this infrastructure is only based on them maintaining good relationships with that country. Full stop. The IMF debt diplomacy, though, as you've described, is way more nefarious because it holds entire countries to ransom and says, if you want money, you have to subject your entire society to austerity measures. Full stop. Cut public spending to essential services, raise taxes, privatize collective goods. Full stop. All of these things suck wealth from the people of that country just so they can get access to some money that will further their debt peonage. I would much rather a country come in and invest in my infrastructure that I can take back when the time is right, as opposed to a global institution that has no democratic oversight, that's literally sucks the wealth out of my country. Full stop. How do you respond to that? Question mark. Please do so briefly and take up a contrary position if necessary. I finished it before you got here. No, I had my coffee before. I couldn't wait. I really needed it. I actually put out an interesting short about coffee the other day on YouTube. I'm not sure if you saw it. I'd like to know your opinions on it. I wasn't notified. See, YouTube stops giving notifications. Like 2 weeks ago, you got like every notification because I saw you commenting on everything. The last 2 weeks, I haven't seen you comment on one thing on YouTube, and I was like, well, look, either she's busy, she's not commenting, or YouTube's not giving her notifications. What the hell? What the hell? What's going on with the algorithm? Like, this is just nonsensical. That's why, like, I really, if you're listening to this and you're not on Patreon, can you please follow the link in the description, go over there, join up for free. So I've got a direct line of communication channel with you. If you can support financially, please, for God's sakes. If not, if you don't want to go to Patreon, like, join the Discord so I can talk to you directly, because I'm struggling with my communication channels here. And like Discord and Patreon give us the flexibility to actually like speak with each other so you can get notifications. I can't believe this is, so even with you, Beatrice, I thought like the YouTube algorithm was like, oh, like certain people will watch this content, so I'll notify them anyway. But like, apparently it doesn't work like that. Really disappointed by that. You work really hard to put out content and you think that people are going to get notified by it, but it means nothing. Let's see what she responds to that, because I was really happy with my response just then. Let's see how she responds to that.
You raise a valid point about the lack of direct military enforcement in China's BRI model, but there's still a fundamental difference in the long-term strategic dependency it creates. By controlling critical infrastructure, ports, railways, and energy facilities, China can leverage economic influence and restrict a nation's sovereignty without the need for physical enforcement, often locking these nations into unequal partnerships that limit their policy options. While IMF austerity measures are undoubtedly exploitative, they are at least tied to conditional loans aimed, theoretically, at economic stabilisation, with some degree of international oversight.
What oversight?
The BRI's model of control via strategic infrastructure risks embedding permanent dependency, leaving nations with little room to reclaim their assets or avoid economic reliance on Beijing's terms. This subtle but pervasive influence can be just as harmful as, if not more insidious than IMF policies.
All right, so basically what she's saying is, like, they're both pretty bad. Fair enough, I'll take your point. But if we go back to the original point of this conversation, which is, oh, China evil in the Western narrative, China is literally doing the exact same stuff that the West does. But when China does it, it's evil. And when the West does it, it's just like, hey, man, it's just business. This is what we do. So, like, again, fundamentally, the Western narrative is flawed because, you know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You know, Mukasa, Sukasa, like all of that type of stuff. Like, it's happening over here in the West, but when China does it, it's not acceptable. Like, the real conversation that we should be having is, why does this shit happen at all? Like, at all. At all. And that's a problem with the capitalist system, and that's why we are revolutionaries through and through. Ladies and gentlemen, I finally been able to throw it out there. I try to do it at least once every live stream or every time I do a piece of content. This is why we are revolutionaries. The system is flawed. You can go about many ways of doing certain things. Okay, we'll do it via the IMF, and like, you know, we'll theoretically try to, you know, economically stabilize a nation, or maybe you'll do long-term strategic dependency and build infrastructure for them, but you'll always have them on a string, so they have to, you know, keep up good relations with you. You know, whatever way you do it, there's problems to it, but it's all under the same system, the capitalist mode of production. This is what it does. It creates situations like this. This is why we are revolutionary. Ladies and gentlemen, there it is. And I'm going to leave it there. So thank you very much for joining the debate today. Thank you very much for listening and going through. True, but how many people get disappeared over there? How many of them are trying to leave but can't? The corruption is far worse because they are larger. I see your point. Okay, I'm going to say, I understand what you're talking about. And I would say, if I can relieve your concerns a little bit, I would say that we, because of the transparency issue, right? Because we are in the West and we don't see what happens over in China and we don't have their take on the issue, we are getting a very distorted picture of what China looks like and how it operates. Like people disappear and stuff like that. And like people kind of, and far worse, there's corruption and stuff like that. All I can say is that like what I've been trying to do in this whole conversation, this whole debate with China, on China with ChatGPT, is that like all of these points that the West raises about China being like, you know, evil, are all things that happen in Western society. Just the problem is, or like the difference is, China does it explicitly and the West does it overtly. They try and cover it up, like kind of thing, and pretend like it doesn't happen. And it's just like, oh no, we live in a free society, so this shit doesn't happen. But like if you scratch under the surface, it's really going on. Like corruption, for instance. Okay, I don't know if you're Australian or not, but there's a really good book called Game of Mates. Okay, and if you've ever read Game of Mates, or like the more updated version of it is called Rigged. If you've ever looked at that book and the way that it's like they describe how corruption happens and stuff like that on the Australian level, like it's no different to the way we describe corruption happening within the CCP, like the Chinese Communist Party. It's just like here we're kind of like, it's business, like kind of thing. And like in China though, it's like, well, that's not acceptable. Why the hell would you do that? Why would you want to support a political establishment that allows that type of corruption to happen? Like over there, it's kind of just like, it's corruption, like kind of thing. But like here, it's kind of just like, well, you know, if we catch these people, then that's good for everyone. So like, it's just a different framing of the same conversation. That's the point I've been trying to make with this. Like people disappearing. I'll give you, you know, that's scary that people disappear. Like I've heard of that. I've definitely heard of that. But like, look at Julian Assange, that comparison I brought up. Like he wasn't even American. Like he released information as an Australian citizen and the Americans basically took him out, like, you know, gave absolutely no shit about international law or our sovereignty as Australians and took him away, and our Australian government did fuck all to help an Australian citizen in the face of like the US, and like they just made him disappear for a long period of time. He's released now, but like look at him. Look at that man. Like he is a husk of the man that he used to be. And like I'm sure that sort of stuff happens in China too, but like the narrative is like, oh well, it happens all the time in China. Does it happen all the time in China? I don't know. This sort of stuff does happen in the West too. It's not like we're not prone to that. Like after 9/11, okay, after 9/11, like the response was terrorism, new laws need to be brought in, and the new laws were in the West, that is, in America, for the first time since like World War II or something like that, torture became legal. If you were being investigated for terrorism in America, you could be taken to Guantanamo Bay or something like that, no trial, nothing. You could be disappeared by the American machine and tortured legally through rendition laws, and you could be taken away by the American state and disappeared for an unspecified period of time for terrorism purposes. That is the exact same pretenses that the Chinese use to, disappear Uyghurs and stuff like that. Exact same pretense, terrorism. Exact same story and narrative. I get your concern though. I completely get your concern. Well, apparently the Uyghur Muslims are being hurt, etc. Camp for them, few thousand. Yes, I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that happens at all. I'm just saying it's a bit, pot calling the kettle black, or whatever that euphemism is. I'm pretty sure I said it right. When we in the West End over here and say, hey, don't do that, China. You're a naughty China. Stop it. Stop it. When like that sort of stuff exists in the West as well. Maybe it's not the same scale. Maybe it's not the same scale, but it does happen in the West. We can't deny that. And we can't hold somebody else accountable to a higher ethical standard if we don't meet that ethical standard ourselves. That's a double standard. And I hate double standards. I really hate double standards. And I think that's what makes me a revolutionary. The Falun Gong. Yes, I've heard about that as well. Heard about it. Get it. I get it. I get it. Enhanced interrogation measures, please. Ha! Yes, sorry. Torture is the wrong word. Enhanced interrogation measures for terrorism purposes. Sorry. Well, yeah, it's a population issue, somewhat millions and billions. Yeah, I guess that scaling thing that's a good factor. I'm glad you actually raised that. That's a good point, actually. When you're dealing with China, you're dealing with like a billion people. And like the most the Americans are dealing with is like what, 300 mil or something like that. So I'm sure there's a scaling law there. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Not to justify anything that's happening in China. And definitely not to justify anything that's happening in the West. Because like I said, we have this, ethical standard, but like we don't practice what we preach ourselves in the West. And so like, I just want, if anything, to be cognizant of that. That's what the point of this debate was. That was the point of watching that video before, if you're around for that. And like talking about like that funny situation that was happening in my most recent video that was going, people were going nuts in the comment section, is that like, we have these double standards, or we have this ethical framework that we expect other people to jump through and like to sing to that tune, but we don't measure ourselves by it. So like, I find that infuriating. Chinese women's army is like 200 million US entire population, but apparently that includes the police force. I don't know. It's scary to think about, isn't it? Like the numbers, like the volumes of people that we are talking about is just mind-boggling. Yeah, that's mental. MysterE. Yes, Beatrice. How may I be of service? Or do you just like saying my name? I'll wait. Anyway, I want to end my debate with ChatGPT there. Because I think it's clear that the Western narrative that she's painting here has valid points, which is what we've been talking about, Matter Dirk, but it doesn't acknowledge the fact that these same issues are happening on both sides of the fence. I checked it out, and apparently I wasn't subscribed on all notifications. Guess it wasn't YouTube's fault. Oh, okay. Well, that does make a difference. You have to, if you want to subscribe and get everything going, like you do press all notifications. But I know people for a fact that press the all notifications button and they still don't get all notifications. I know that for a fact. So like, I'm still sure that YouTube's playing a weird game there. But like, thank you for confirming, and thank you for putting an end to my little rant against the YouTube algorithm. I hope it's not listening to me. I love you, YouTube. Please don't shadow ban me or something like that. Yes, in saying that, I really liked the exchange in this live stream, by the way. Not just the exchange that I mean like with ChatGPT, but between me and the chat. So thank you if you've been adding to the discussion. JBJ042. I wish I knew who you were. and like I could put some type of personality, online persona to the name. So I'm not sure if you are in the Discord server, but like please come and join the chat. You too, MysterE. If you are not in the Discord server, come and join. If you're not on the Patreon, come and join, become a member for free. If not, please financially support. But there's a different communication channel over there. So basically the same as Red Rooster, Friendly Geordies reference. I don't watch Friendly Geordie's content. I might watch it very, very sporadically. So I'm not sure about the Red Rooster reference there. Maybe I'll have to ask him about it. But like, yes. Please join us over on Discord, and please join me over there on Patreon as well. I'll put the links in the chat for you right now. So you can do that. You can join the conversation. You can become a member. Let me just do that now. For anyone who's new to the conversation. And like, where's the link for Discord? Invite your friends. Come, friends. Join. Yeah, cheers. Cheers, MysterE. Thank you for joining in on the conversation. It's been quite interesting, this debate, because there's so many good opinions on like China. And like, it's just like, I just feel like in the West, we just get this really, really underwhelming story about like what is going on with China. It's all just doom and gloom stuff. So like, which is, it's unfortunate, but it's just the nature of the beast. It's the nature of the mainstream media, as Gumma Cheese Wing would say, and rightly so. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me today, and we'll do another live stream next week. I'm not doing anything on Friday, which is usually my peak day, but like I've got other stuff on, unfortunately. So yeah, thank you so much for joining in, like I've said, and as always, please remember, I am, you are, we are MysterE. Enjoy. Oh, just before I go, which is why I recommend Spencer. He loves China, but also sees the horror. Interesting. Okay, so balanced opinions, objective approach to things. Good. I will check it out. Thank you for the suggestion. And like I said, please remember, I am, you are, we are a MysterE. See you all next time.